For decades, the U.S. has not just ruled the whole world through its powerful military and its foreign policy, but through something far more powerful. It is so powerful that it dictates the supply chains, businesses, and global trade. From energy markets to international trade and foreign reserves, it is a piece of the puzzle that holds the world economy together. And that piece of the puzzle is the U.S. dollar. It is so influential and dominant that 59% of the world's foreign exchange reserves are in dollars. Not only that, but it is also the backbone of the entire global economy, a sign of trust, power, and control. That means everything runs on the U.S. dollar, from oil in the Middle East to the food on your table and accessories in your home. However, behind such great power lies great vulnerability. Just imagine you wake up one morning and find out that the U.S. dollar is worthless, with no value, backup, or power. What would happen if the U.S. dollar's dominance all over the world suddenly crashes to the ground? And more importantly, will it impact just the American economy, or will the whole world feel its tremors? Let's explore the possible consequences. A quick look at history reveals that the U.S. dollar wasn't the global powerhouse it is today. It started off just like any other currency, and its value was pegged to gold and silver. But it still didn't possess the international influence until World War II. During the war, the U.S. was the main supplier of weapons and other goods to the Allies countries. Most of these countries paid in gold, making the U.S. the owner of a majority of gold by the end of the war. So, the return to the gold currency wasn't possible, as many countries depleted their gold reserves. That's why many countries needed a common currency to trade and manage war losses. While other countries were recovering from war, the U.S. made a bold move at the Bretton Woods Conference in 1944. The U.S. pegged all major currencies to the U.S. dollar and pegged the dollar to gold. As the U.S. had huge amounts of gold already, that made the U.S. dollar a stable and powerful currency. This set the stage for the dollar to dominate all over the world. The U.S. dollar was crowned as the world's reserve currency and was also backed by the world's largest gold reserves. Instead of gold, other countries started gathering the U.S. dollar as a form of reserves. But it also posed certain challenges for the U.S. As countries were rushing in line to buy U.S. dollars, Washington did not have enough gold to cover the dollars outside the United States. This posed fears that it could wipe out U.S. gold reserves. That is the reason President Richard Nixon suspended the dollar's convertibility to gold in 1971. This marked the end of the Bretton Woods exchange rate system, and the dollar became a more prominent currency than ever. In the coming decades, the dollar grew as the world's primary reserve currency. It was a go-to destination for international trade, oil transactions, and global banking. Still now, there are many reasons that the U.S. dollar is the currency of choice for international trade. That is due to its stable value, the size of the U.S. economy, and the U.S.'s geopolitical dominance. But as this trust in the U.S. dollar has remained unchallenged for so long, what happens if this trust starts to fade? So what would the world look like if the U.S. dollar crumbles overnight? But first, let's take a look at what could be the causes behind the collapse of the U.S. dollar. Simply put, the U.S. dollar is the core of the global economy. But let's not forget, it's not invincible. It could collapse from a number of factors, like internal economic issues to external global shifts. The first factor that could bring unforeseen dollar collapse is the U.S. national debt, which has surpassed $34 trillion for the first time. To give you an idea, the U.S. GDP is $30 trillion. That means the country owes more than it actually produces each year. Such a huge public debt has a significant impact on the U.S. dollar. As the debt grows, the U.S. government borrows more money to meet its needs, and the country does it by issuing treasury bonds. These bonds are simply the promises to pay back lenders, and they are bought by investors and governments all around the world. However, if debt continues to increase, then investors may lose confidence in the U.S. bonds as a safe investment. It eventually leads to higher interest rates and the devaluation of the dollar. Moreover, the fear of default could cause stakeholders to sell off their assets, which further puts questions on the U.S. dollar. To counter that, if the U.S. prints more money, then it can also lose its status as the world's reserve currency. So other countries may stop buying US dollars, which could bring severe inflation and financial instability. Ultimately, the US dollar could be replaced by another powerful currency. And it seems the speculations are true. The rise of de-dollarization is a growing trend among many countries and economic alliances that want to reduce their dependence on the US dollar. The prominent economic bloc to challenge US dollar dominance is BRICS, an alliance of Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa. These countries now comprise more than a quarter of the global economy and almost half of the world's population. With that power, this bloc wants to challenge US dollar dominance and introduce its own common currency. For example, China has been leading the charge with digital yuan, which could replace the US dollar in key global financial transactions. On the other hand, Russia has also been working to increase its gold reserves and trade in rubles rather than dollars, especially with countries like Iran. On top of that, BRICS countries are also setting up alternative payment systems to replace the US-dominated SWIFT system for cross-border payments. Besides that, the BRICS nations are pushing for a new world reserve currency that could challenge the US dollar's dominance in global markets. That means, if they are successful, then it could significantly shift the global financial system. And it's not just about politics. Even the foundation of the dollar's strength is starting to shift under its feet. Yes, the cracks in the petrodollar system are exposing. Petrodollars are the US dollars earned by countries through the sale of oil and other petroleum products. The currency on which the US relied for decades seems to be witnessing its doom in the coming years. As long as oil was traded in dollars, the world needed dollars. So obviously, the US dollar was in a win-win situation. The petrodollar system increased global demand for the US dollar, and it became the world's fuel token. Moreover, it has also benefited the US economy and kept the dollar at a stable pace. It lowers borrowing costs for the US and also maintains its geopolitical influence. But now, the tides are shifting. Powerful countries and global alliances want to shift away from dollar-dominated markets. Rather, they want to empower their own currency. So what if the petrodollar system falls apart? If it falls apart, then countries won't buy the US dollars to buy the oil and trade. And believe me, that's a big deal. The value of the dollar would fall, inflation could rise in the US, and ultimately, it could shake the foundations of the US economy. And it could also trigger a global financial shift away from dollar dominance. So, once a currency that kept the thread of the global economy together could also shake the entire world after its collapse. The result won't be just a crisis in America, but it will be global chaos. Let's explain how a dollar collapse can bring global chaos. First of all, the US dollar is the world's reserve currency, and it makes up 59% of the global foreign exchange reserves. That means the US dollar is not just America's money, but it's the world's money, as many countries have trillions of dollars of reserves in dollars. As of 2022, China has $3.2 trillion, Japan has $1.2 trillion foreign exchange reserves. These huge reserves show that the dollar is king in the international market. Many countries hold the dollar in massive quantities in central banks, treasuries, and foreign exchange reserves to back their own currency. So whether you are in Tokyo, Paris, Beijing, or Kenya, if your country trades with the world, it needs dollars. Simply put, their economic wealth is tied to the US dollars, and their currencies fluctuate on the basis of US interest rate decisions. So if the dollar collapses, it would send shockwaves through every central bank, every economy, and every trade system in the world. It won't just hit Wall Street or Citibank, but every nation and its financial system will be turned upside down. The countries would lose billions, go bankrupt, and maybe even get on the verge of economic disaster. Ultimately, global trade would come to a screeching halt. Well, it's easy to do business in US dollars as it plays a major role in global trade. According to reports, it is used in 54% of the global trade invoices. It looks like the dollar acts like a common language for global commerce. Shipping contracts, oil deals, and international loans all rely on the US dollar. So if the dollar crashes suddenly, then businesses and nations would no longer know how to price goods and settle accounts or business deals. It would result in a complete freeze in international trade. Global supply chains would be disrupted. The countries that depend more on imports like food, fuel, and machinery would face immediate shortages. Ports would sit idle and factories would stop running. The world would stop, but not from a war or a natural disaster, but from just the collapse of a currency. This is just the tip of the iceberg. You see, if the dollar collapses, then financial markets all around the world crash. Most global investors consider U.S. Treasury bonds as the safest investment. If the dollar falls, then this illusion would also break. Foreign governments, banks, pension funds, and sovereign wealth funds possess trillions of dollars in U.S. bonds. So all of them would suddenly lose value. Stock markets would crash, and there would be massive capital flight due to erosion of confidence in the U.S. dollar. Other major currencies like euro, yuan, and yen would also become unstable as demand would flood into gold or other digital currencies instead of traditional ones. Every financial institution, from the IMF to the World Bank, would face an unprecedented crisis. It would lead to currency wars and economic fragmentation. Firstly, with the dollar gone as the global reserve currency, there would be a vacuum, and to fill that vacuum, every other nation would try to empower their currency and protect their economies. That would lead to currency wars, trade wars, and new financial alliances. To achieve this, countries would intentionally devalue their currency to get a competitive edge in international trade. It would make exports cheaper and imports expensive, giving a stable economic growth. Interestingly, countries would do this on purpose. Some of them would try to lower interest rates to gain a competitive edge, and others would print more money to manage economic growth. Maybe some of them peg their currency to gold or oil, and all of them would try to get ahead at the expense of each other. So there won't be a meaningful cooperation between them, but conflicts of interest and clashes. Secondly, new economic alliances would emerge. Maybe the BRICS nations present their own currency backed by gold or a digital one. Furthermore, Europe may lean fully into the euro. China, on the other hand, may force its trading partners to trade in digital yuan. So all of them would work for their own vested interests. But the problem is, there won't be a central standard anymore. There would be no rules, policies, or financial obligations. And here's the worst part. The developing economies would suffer the most because they don't have stable currencies. Most of them hold debt in US dollars. With the dollar gone, they would lose international funding and loans, and their economies would shatter. Their dollar-dominated debt would be impossible to repay. Furthermore, inflation will skyrocket, which would have a direct impact on food and fuel affordability. Many governments won't be able to afford social programs, and there would be rampant poverty. It would lead to humanitarian crises, social unrest, and government collapse. Ultimately, civil wars would erupt from sub-Saharan Africa to South Asia to Latin America. Not only that, there would be a global refugee crisis, which would plunge the countries into unlikely circumstances. Besides all these horrible effects of the US dollar collapse, there are other scenarios that could change the whole world. If the US dollar collapses, then the U.S. economy and its powerful military will also fall to the ground. Everyone knows that the U.S. has the most powerful military force in the world, and this huge military runs on a massive defense budget of $841 billion annually, which is even more than the total European Union defense budget. Where does all this money come from? Well, it is funded largely by the debt that Washington provides to other countries. So that's what funds the Pentagon, finances its global military bases, advanced technology, jets, ships, and satellites. So, in simple words, the dollar is the key holding the U.S. empire and maintaining its military presence all around the world. But what if it falls apart? If the dollar breaks down, then it will be the end of the blank check for the global military power and its 750 military bases in almost 80 countries worldwide. These U.S. global military bases will go dark, and their military operations will halt all over. Then, it's about the perception of dominance. When the dollar cracks, this dominance will also crack. Meanwhile, the U.S.'s main rivals, Russia, China, and Iran, may sense weakness and make aggressive moves. So for the U.S., it's not about losing their currency, it's about losing respect and deterrence. So, in the long run, the end of the U.S. dollar won't just be an American tragedy, but it will feel like a global earthquake. Every financial market, every central bank, and every business in every corner of the world would be affected by a dollar collapse. To counter these horrible situations, the countries would scramble to protect their economies. So, a struggle for power and survival will continue, and everyone will get in line to undermine the other. It would mark the beginning of an era with a more unstable world order. Additionally, the fall of the US dollar won't just be a market crash, but it will be the fall of a mighty currency for which the world was never prepared. The savings of billions of people would vanish, not because they made bad choices, but because they relied on a currency with an illusion of stability. And in the silence after this collapse, only one question will remain. Who would rise from the ashes to rule the world? Would it be China, Russia, or another unpredictable one? What are your thoughts about it? Do you think the collapse of the US dollar will bring unforeseen consequences for the whole world? Let me know in the comments below. Speaking of collapses, click here to find out what could happen if NATO collapsed.